Hello and welcome to my channel. Rhino here. It's not Meathead Monday, but I'm still on vacation, so you get another Chungus cut. Today, I'm looking at a video by Earley, which is titled Atheism Number 1. So it's obviously going to be him with a big foam finger talking about how awesome atheism is, because it gives you the freedom to figure out morality for yourself instead of trying to force you to conform to the moral code laid out in a book written by people who thought that owning slaves was an okay thing to do, right? Let's go.
Do you realize in the Western world that several years ago, 1 out of 10 Americans identified themselves as either an atheist, an agnostic, or a spiritual nothing?
I'm pretty sure the people that you have decided to call spiritual nothings might take issue with that. Religiously unaffiliated would have been a more appropriate term. A lot of people in that category would consider themselves to be spiritual, but not religious.
Recently, that number had increased to 1 out of 4.
Yep, and I could optimistically look at that increase in religious non-affiliation and call it a victory, and in a way it is, but at the end of the day, self-identified atheists are up from 2% in 1991 to 3.1% as of 2014. That's not a huge increase. Though that is only self-described atheist. I could claim that the number is around 9% because that's how many people agreed with the statement, "I do not believe in God," and no matter how you define atheist, that is kind of what it all breaks down to. Do you think that atheism is a lack of belief in a god or gods? Well, then someone who says, "I do not believe in God," is an atheist. Do you claim that atheism is the positive claim that no god or gods exist? Then someone who says, "I do not believe in God," is an atheist. But only 3.1% of people are willing to actually call themselves atheists. Seems like we've got some pretty severe negative stigma to overcome. But also worth mentioning is that these are American data. These numbers will vary by region, sometimes quite significantly.
Atheism is a fast-growing belief system in our country.
Not fast enough, given the data.
What is atheism? Well, that's what we're going to talk about the next few days. The dictionary defines it as no belief in the existence of God or gods.
Depends on the dictionary, but I can accept that definition. Though I also have to believe that he can't have looked at the whiteboard, read that definition from it, and not noticed the glaring typo. Is it a typo when it's handwritten? No belief is existence of God/gods. But yeah, you could have stopped the camera and fixed that before moving on, is what I'm saying.
And it's becoming very popular. For example, one of our more popular actors, George Clooney, said, "I don't believe in heaven or hell, and I don't believe in God. All I know is that I won't allow this life to be wasted."
Good. We need more prominent public figures to make statements like that. It helps with the whole destigmatization thing. But for every one George Clooney willing to make a statement like that, you have a bunch of others thanking God for making sure they win an award or something.
First off, I want to thank God.
Because a God who intervenes to make sure a specific entertainer is adequately recognized, while refusing to intervene to make sure all the children of the world are adequately fed, is surely a good God, right?
His buddy Brad Pitt, also a famous actor.
I like how you feel the need to point out that Brad Pitt and George Clooney are famous actors. Like, they are. It's just funny to me that you feel the need to point it out.
Said, "I'm probably 20% atheist, 80% agnostic. I don't think anybody really knows."
Now, that is not the kind of statement that we need more of. At least he was willing to use the dreaded atheist label to account for 20%. Not sure how you can really be 20% atheist. I only believe in 80% of a god, so the other percent doesn't exist for sure? Sorry, his 80% was agnostic, so I'm not sure if 80% of a god exists, but 20% of it doesn't exist for sure. This is the kind of thing that creates extra confusion. It's really not helpful.
You'll either find out or not when you get there. Until then, there's no point thinking about it.
I disagree that there's no point thinking about it, but I can also perfectly understand how people might just want to go about their lives and not worry about the God of the Bible, just as Christians go about their lives without worrying about Zeus or Allah or Vishnu or leprechauns, etc. It's about priorities, I guess. Just try to be aware that it's not a given that everyone takes your religion seriously or at face value, and that's okay. If you can't overcome the incredibly minor question of why I should take yours seriously but not others, then you don't really deserve to be taken seriously.
Well, I disagree. I disagree with all those statements.
Obviously. Now, please explain why I should disagree as well.
You can know that there is a God, and you better think about it now because it will make a big difference in your daily life as well as your eternal existence.
So we should take you seriously, because if we don't, we'll regret it when we're dead. And as a former Christian, I can tell you it didn't make a huge difference in my life, except I wasted a lot more of it doing church-related stuff, and I wasted a lot more money giving to the church when I really didn't have enough money to live on at the time. And the church never did anything to help me when I was in financial need, despite the fact that I did everything I could to prop it up financially. So yeah, actually it does make a big difference in your life. It's a financial drain.
Well, there are several reasons why people become atheists.
No, there's one reason. They stop believing in God. That's it. That's the whole thing. Nobody sat down and weighed the pros and cons of belief in God as though it were simply a matter of choosing the most appealing belief system.
But one reason a lot of younger Americans are choosing to say that they are atheist is this reason. Because if there is no God, I can be my own God.
I know of zero atheists who think that they are their own God. The atheists I know best are often some of the most humble people I've met. Now, do arrogant atheists exist? Of course they do. Do atheists with a God complex exist? Probably, but that's not the majority, not by a long shot.
If I can be my own God, I can live however I choose.
Those two don't flow from each other. I mean, if I am a god, then yes, I can live however I choose, but there's also the fact that if there is no god enforcing any particular code of conduct, then I don't have to follow outdated codes of conduct laid down by people with demonstrably harmful moral systems like those laid out in the Bible.
And if I can live however I choose, you can't judge me because there's no God, there's no standard of judgment.
God does not automatically equal standard of judgment. Sure, I can judge you. What are the results of your actions? Do you have a positive or negative impact on those around you? That's the standard. Actual outcomes. Not pretend outcomes that happen after you die. Actual, real, measurable outcomes that happen now while we're alive.
So I'm going to do what I want to do and you can't tell me it's wrong.
Depends what you're referring to here. Do you want to try pegging with your wife? Go for it. Have fun. I don't want to see it or hear any details about it, but it's not wrong. You want to ban abortions? Well, now we've reached the territory into which you're having an impact on other people's lives. Now, let's ignore the main thrust of the abortion argument here. It is about bodily autonomy, but let's set that aside and pretend that a blastocyst is an independent individual person. If your goal is to avoid killing them, then you should be against restricting access to abortions, because it is a fact that the highest abortion rates are found in countries with the highest restrictions on abortions. So if you actually have a goal of preventing abortions, then the best way to accomplish that goal is through comprehensive sex education, not through abortion restrictions. Because when restrictions are in place, they don't typically decrease in number, but they do decrease in safety. So now you've not only increased the number of abortions that are likely to be performed, but also increased the number of people that will suffer through complications caused by unsafe abortions. So pro-life or pro-choice, doesn't matter. If the goal is to actually preserve life and prevent abortions, then they should be easily accessible along with family planning resources.
And more young adults in America are buying into this belief. Well, that has cultural results we're seeing in our country. You have confusion. If there's no right and wrong, well then people aren't sure about their identity.
You're right. I really don't know who I am as a person, because I'm free to murder whoever I want, you see? Except I'm not really, because, laws are a thing that exist.
Am I male or am I a female?
Oh, even better. I don't know whether I'm male or female because I'm free to murder whoever I want. How are these two things even tied together in your head? For me, this is one of those measure the outcomes things. Does being trans hurt anyone? No. Does being anti-trans hurt anyone? Yes, very much so. The research is quite clear. The more supportive the community around a trans individual, the better the outcomes for everyone involved. Add medical treatment to it, and it gets even better. Long-term, after gender-affirming surgery, every year sees an 8% reduction in the likelihood that they will need mental health treatment. So, yeah, just let trans people be.
They're not sure about what marriage is. Is it a man and a man or a woman and a woman? What is marriage?
Marriage is the legally or formally recognized union of two people as partners in a personal relationship. That is not confusing, and the genders of the two people are completely irrelevant. If the idea of a man marrying another man is distasteful to you, then I've got some good news for you. You don't have to marry another man. You are free to marry a woman. Who you marry is your business, not mine. Likewise, who other people choose to marry is their business, not yours. So, who is more confused about marriage? The people who recognize that it's a personal decision and is therefore up to the individual person to decide for themselves? Or the people who think that if two men or two women are allowed to marry somewhere, that will somehow have an impact on their own marriage?
There's a lot of confusion. What is a family?
A group of one or more parents and their children living together as a unit. At least that's the definition that I think is relevant here. If you'd like a more broad definition, all of the descendants of a common ancestor fits the bill.
How should a government function?
Well, that one does get confusing, but it's not confusing because of atheism. It's confusing because people are complicated, and a government is made up of a bunch of complicated people that are governing over a bunch of other complicated people, all with a diversity of opinions on how it should function. And this goes for any form of government, even a dictatorship. A dictator will still need underlings, and the underlings are not going to agree with the dictator all the time, even if they do have to keep their disagreements to themselves for fear of their lives. What I hear you saying here is that you think things would be so much easier if we would all just run the government the way you want it to be run, and that's kind of scary, to be honest, especially in our current climate.
What's a society really all about?
Intercourse. No, really, I mean that. It's not a dirty joke. Intercourse is communication or dealings between individuals or groups, and that is literally what society is about. But also, intercourse.
And so you have a lot of confusion going on. When you have that going on, you have crumbling.
If you experience crumbling after intercourse, please see your doctor.
Right now in America, we have a deconstruction of all the foundational things that make our society a society that has worked.
Periodic deconstruction and reconstruction is a good thing. Depending on how you define worked, society worked when it was running on the feudal system. But through several deconstructions and reconstructions, we now have several countries running on variations of democracy, which seems to be one of the better systems of government thus far, but it is still rather young. Monarchies were the name of the game for thousands of years. Modern democracy has only been around for a few hundred. But the advantage of democracy is that it has built-in mechanisms for achieving necessary changes, so you don't need to completely destabilize society in order to accomplish these changes. What a depressing sentence to read today. Oh boy. You didn't need to destabilize your country, guys. You could have just done it the normal way. So when it came time to end slavery, that could be accomplished without violent revolution. Or rather, it was in a lot of places, and it could have been in the US, but, you know, it's the US. Oh boy. That sentence hits different today than it did when I wrote it, okay? I'm sorry.
We have a deconstruction of our individual identity.
Nobody is forcing you to deconstruct your identity. A lot of people refer to the process of reevaluating their religious beliefs as deconstruction, where they question different parts of their faith, and often these people find the answers to be rather insufficient. So after deconstruction, there isn't much left of the religious belief to reconstruct. But that is a personal quest that you don't have to go through yourself. Though, honestly, if you really believe in Christianity, you should want everyone to go through that process, because if Christianity is true, then questioning the individual parts of the faith should always lead one back to Christianity. The fact that it does not is apparently scary to you. Maybe you should deconstruct that feeling and figure out why you are scared of people questioning things.
Our genders. People are confused. They don't know if they're a male or a female or what they are.
Most people do know. The vast majority of people know. I know that I am a man. Most people are cis and identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth. And most trans people are not confused about what gender they are. They know what gender they are, it just doesn't necessarily match up with what they were assigned at birth. Any confusion about gender usually lies in an insistence that trans people don't exist. So when a trans person is raised in an environment that denies the existence of trans people, it ends up rather confusing for them. So once again, the confusion lies on your side of the table.
They're confused. and the sense of identity is crumbling. Marriage is crumbling.
How exactly is marriage crumbling? The first time I got married, it was in a non-gay marriage on the exact day when same-sex marriage was legalized in Canada. Did the fact that many gay couples got married on the same day do anything to delegitimize my marriage? No. In fact, until I wrote the script for this video, I didn't even realize that we got married on such a significant day. So we were married for 16 years before she died, and all of the same-sex couples that were married for the same length of time had zero impact on our relationship.
What is marriage? A man with a man, a woman with a woman, a human with an animal?
Who is advocating for humans marrying animals, Dave? Why do you assume that this is where it will lead? Canada has had same-sex marriage nationally since 2005, and since 2003 on a provincial level, and I'm not aware of anyone even attempting to put forth any legislation regarding the marriage of animals.
It's being redefined. The true biblical definition of marriage is crumbling.
I mean, the true biblical definition of marriage is one man and as many women as he can afford to keep. And the women get little say in the matter, usually being sold to the man by their fathers or being captured in a military conquest. Also, concubines were a thing that the Bible never explicitly condemned. I mean, it is certainly heavily implied that such practices are frowned on in the New Testament, but the Old Testament only seems to have a problem with such practices if the women are foreign, because miscegenation is a bad thing, I guess. Great moral book you got there.
What's a family? A committed husband and wife raising children.
Children who are often talked about in the Bible as though they are replaceable. That's how Job's story ends. After all of his kids die and he endures his trials, God rewards him by replacing his kids. And the whole sacrificing of Isaac thing seems to place a weird emphasis on the fact that Isaac is Abraham's only son, as though it wouldn't be as big of a sacrifice if he had other kids, which he actually did. That story seems to have forgotten about Ishmael. Also, Jephthah's daughter. That story goes out of its way to point out that she is his only child. Anytime something like this happens to a child, it always makes a big deal about the ones that are the only child. Almost like that's worse than losing just one of many children. Oh, also, if you had a child with your wife's slave, that child still counts as your wife's child, like you were just borrowing the slave's uterus. Also, if your brother dies without having had a kid, his wife is not your wife now, but it is your duty to impregnate her. And also, the original engagement ring is a nose ring, according to the Bible, so that's fun.
Or now, is it 2 men and a child, or 2 women and a child? What is a family?
Sure, those can be families. Why not?
That's being redefined. Traditional family is being attacked, and it's crumbling.
The traditional family, as laid out by the Bible, is a gross, misogynistic, patriarchal system that treats women just slightly better than it treats slaves. It doesn't even come close to reflecting what most modern Christians think of when they hear the words traditional marriage or traditional family.
How's a government supposed to work? Who's supposed to have authority and tell me what to do?
Well, according to the Bible, that's none of your concern. You just have to do it. Romans 13 is quite clear that God put the authorities in power. They have no power except for God, so you must submit to them. So to complain about the government is to complain about the choices that God made and who should be governing. Also, keep in mind, I am Canadian, so Mark Carney is my prime minister right now. The Christians are complaining about him just like they did about Joe Biden, so yeah, the fact that the Christian nationalists are happy about the government in the States doesn't take away from this point.
And so there's a lot of crumbling, and that results in a lot of conflict. We have protest. We have rebellion.
The right to peacefully protest is one of the primary mechanisms by which change is achieved. And if we're talking rebellion, then there were an awful lot of Christian flags and symbols at the Capitol buildings on January 6th. Just saying.
And we have this sense that I can be my own God, and so I'm going to do what I want to do. And if you try to tell me it's wrong, you're wrong, and we're going to have conflict.
Isn't that just typical? The apologist whining about other people being given equal rights blames the people who currently don't have equal rights for wanting equal rights. There wouldn't be any conflict if those people would just shut up and accept their place as not deserving the same basic human dignity as I get. Why do they have to cause so much conflict? Look in a mirror, Dave.
Well, there's also personal results of atheism, and these are very serious. One is emptiness.
Well, as an atheist, I had a big lunch today, so I'm actually rather full at the moment.
We understand that God created all of us with a God-shaped void in our lives. We have a God-shaped hole. And no one but God, nothing but God can fill that hole.
I feel like you just need to try a bigger butt plug. Eventually you get used to it, and the bigger ones can do a better job at filling those God-shaped holes. They even make God-shaped butt plugs if you like. But this video is already skirting pretty close to the monetization edge, so I'm not going to show you that. You can Google it if you want to.
Alcohol, drugs, sex, money, power, nothing can fill that hole.
I'm not a big drinker, I don't sleep around, and I have enough money to get by, but not enough money to properly fix the driveway or build the office in the garage that I really, really want. Patreon.com/ViceRhino. My kids would really like to use this as a bedroom so they can each get their own room. So, yeah, Patreon.com/ViceRhino. I don't do drugs, I have basically zero power, though certainly YouTubers smaller than me have gone on power trips in the past, but they always make themselves look really bad when they do that, because YouTubers don't really have a lot of power. At least not the little ones like me. The bigger ones do have some. So, yeah, I don't even try to fill my hole with any of this stuff. So, what does that mean? I'm happy in my life. I'm satisfied. I'm content. I would be more content if I had a secret staircase leading up to an attic bedroom hidden by a bookshelf door. Is that my God hole? Can I fill my God-shaped hole with hidden doors and secret passages?
But we live in a society that says there is no God.
No, society is still very much on God's side. I mean, you're all worried about the government falling apart because of a lack of Christianity, but 87% of the current Congress is Christian of one flavor or another, with only 3 members being religiously unaffiliated, so maybe not even atheist. So that's 0.6% of Congress representing 28% of the population. Bit skewed if you ask me.
So people are trying to fill that hole with everything but God, and it's not working.
Well, now you're just down a rabbit hole of unsubstantiated claims. You claim that there's a God-shaped hole. Well, what is your evidence? This is pure assertion. You claim that there is a God that leaves a God-shaped hole if we don't believe in him. What is your evidence for God? Thus far, your evidence seems to be the existence of the God-shaped hole, which was based entirely on assertion. So you have an assertion that a God exists, and you seem to have a complete lack of understanding of anything to do with atheism.
We have the highest rate of addiction we've ever had. We have more people dying of drug overdoses than we've ever had.
Yes, addiction and overdoses are more of a problem now than they have been in the past. But drug addiction is a complex beast, and there are many factors at play. Religiosity is not one of the factors at play. In the United States in particular, the profit-driven healthcare system, in which doctors receive financial incentives for prescribing certain medications, played a huge role when OxyContin was developed in the 90s, combined with a handful of inadequate studies that suggested that opioids were not addictive. But whatever else you can say about the cause of modern drug problems, one thing is certain. Europe is doing much better than the United States is. Europe is also typically less religious than the United States, so drug addiction and overdoses do not correlate with religiosity at all.
We have the highest rate of suicide, the highest rate of depression.
Suicide rates have only just in the last few years gotten higher than they were in 1977, and in the United States they were on a sharp decline throughout the 1990s, while the opioid crisis was taking off. So you have to choose here. If you want one of these to be tied to rising atheism, you can't have the other one also tied to atheism because they don't correlate with each other. Though really, it's not about choosing if we actually care about the data, it's about seeing which one matches the data. And it's neither. Neither matches the data.
There's going to be emptiness. If you choose to live without God, you're choosing a life of inner emptiness.
The times when I felt the most dejected and empty in my life were the times when I was a Christian and doing things that Christians are not supposed to do, but are actually healthy and normal activities, like masturbation. Since letting go of God, I've had a much more fulfilling life without having had to feel guilt or shame for these healthy, normal things.
Second, you're choosing a life of eternal separation. You see, if you don't want God in this life, you will not have God in the next life.
Believe me, or you'll regret it when you die. That's what you're saying here. Bring evidence to the table, or get out. The Muslims agree that non-believers will not go to heaven, so how do I, a non-believer in both religions, decide which one to believe? If I'm going purely by claims of what will happen after death without evidence, the decision is impossible.
And that's a terrible decision, because God is love.
God is love. But he'll burn you forever if you don't love him back. Okay, yeah, Dave seems to be more of an eternal separation type of Christian, so maybe he doesn't believe in the torture part, and is of the opinion that separation from God is the real torture, but it's a torture of wanting to be with someone that you cannot be with. Well, if God knows that that is coming, then he can't be all-loving if he doesn't reveal himself to everyone in a way that will cause them to believe in him without question, because a loving God would do everything in his power to avoid that negative outcome, and since he is all-powerful, that means that a belief in him shouldn't be a matter of choice. We should all just believe. And this doesn't affect free will. Satan knows for sure that God exists, and still chooses to disobey. So free will doesn't save this argument. The fact that atheists exist is a demonstration that either the God of the Bible does not exist, or at the very least, he is not all-loving.
God is light. God is life. God gives joy. God is the God of peace.
God of peace? The guy who drowned everyone in the world? The guy who ordered several genocides? The guy who, in the book that is supposed to be his word, had written, "Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock"? That guy is a God of peace? Next you'll be telling me that Donald Trump got nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by a genocidal maniac. I hate this timeline. Oh, but all that stuff was Old Testament stuff. Violence was necessary back then for some reason, and God was powerless to make it unnecessary, despite his omnipotence. Okay, well, Jesus said in Matthew 10:34, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword," before going on to list all the people that he's going to set against each other. Some God of peace you got there.
God is the God of hope. God is the God of truth.
The God of truth has a history of deceiving and lying to people. It seems like your God is the God of double standards, if anything.
Do you want to live your life without any of those things? Do you want to live your eternity without any of those things?
Given God's history of not actually providing those things, and often directly fighting against them, I don't really think your God is the path to obtaining those things.
Because if you tell God to push off in this life, God will not force you to spend eternity with Him. In fact, you have chosen to spend eternity without Him in darkness.
God didn't send you to hell. You chose to go there yourself by not believing in Him without there being evidence first. Great.
Hey, there is a God. He's real. There's evidence for God. He loves you. He sent His Son to die for you.
Is that supposed to be the evidence? Because that sounds an awful lot like another claim that needs evidence to support it, rather than being supporting evidence of the God claim.
I encourage you, open your mind, study the truth, and get to know the real and living God.
I did that, and the response I got from God was indistinguishable from what it would have been if God did not exist. So I no longer believe that a God exists, since he behaves in a way that is identical to how a non-existent God would behave. That's it for this one. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Rob Jackson, who says, "I'm curious, have any miracles ever in history been proven to have been miracles? And I may not understand the science, but I know there is enough evidence to say creationists are wrong." Well, with regards to miracles, the Catholic Church has a vested interest in proving miracles, because in order for someone to be canonized as a saint, they have to have 2 verified posthumous miracles attributed to them. So if we look at the list of the top 10 miracles of the Catholic Church, as compiled by a Catholic organization, we find that the number 1 spot, their best miracle, is the miracle of the sun, in which a few thousand people who were expecting to see an apparition of the Virgin Mary stared directly into the sun and saw some weird stuff. Notably not the Virgin Mary, just stuff like the sun flickering and going all rainbowy and moving and stuff. You know, the kinds of things that you're likely to see if you stare directly into the sun? Also, the kids that predicted the apparition of Mary on the 13th of the month had been predicting that Mary would appear on the 13th of every month for 6 months prior. The October one is just the one that gained traction. Also, Mary was supposed to bring peace to the world, and World War I didn't end for another 13 months after that. And this is the best evidenced miracle that they can come up with. So to answer your question, no miracles have ever been demonstrated to be miraculous in any way, shape, or form. Thanks for watching. Special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the plug that fills the patron-shaped hole in my heart. If you'd like to provide me with ongoing care for the serious condition of having heart holes, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino. I don't really have heart holes, but I have other holes that your money can fill. If you feel so inclined, you can also support the channel through direct donation or my Amazon wishlist, which are linked in the description. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my P.O. Box address is in the description. See you next time! End of part 1. Part 2 begins now. Hello and welcome to my channel. Vice Rhino here. Today, I'm looking at a video that is part 2 of one that I responded to like 3 years ago now. It's on Dave Earley's channel. No, not the Dave Earley that was the drummer for Van Morrison for a time. Dave Earley of Dave Earley Ministries. This video is simply titled Atheism Number 2, Why Atheism? Which admittedly is a much more informative title than his first video, which was simply called Atheism Number 1. So let's see what he gets up to this time.
Why do people become atheists?
There are a number of reasons. For me, it was that I stopped believing in Christianity for a number of reasons, and I didn't have any reason to pick up any other version of a God belief, so I landed on there's probably not a God of any kind, which is atheism. Well, I guess if you run in philosoph-bro circles, you might be tempted to tell me that no, that's actually agnosticism. Atheism is when you make the claim that you know for sure that there is no God of any kind. And since I said probably not rather than definitely not, I am agnostic, not atheist. But that's a rather dull argument that relies on treating every conversation as though it is a formal debate, so I don't actually care. For the sake of communicating what I mean with my words in a way that people understand, I will continue to say that I am an atheist, because I do not believe in any god or gods.
What is it that brings someone to the place where they say there is no God, there's no God in the universe.
Specific to me, it was that I noticed that the Bible wasn't perfect, and I believed up until that point that it was the perfect word of God, and the idea that a perfect God would leave us with an imperfect book just didn't make any sense to me. That's a bit oversimplified, but it is the essentials.
How can they say that? How did they get there? Well, I think there are three main causes, reasons why people become atheists. A lack of evidence.
Yep, that one's me. But hey, as long as we're talking specifically about the Christian God, it's more than just a lack of evidence. There's also a bunch of evidence against his existence. My go-to is to point out that 1 John 4:8 says that God is love. 1 Corinthians 13:4 says that love is not jealous. And Exodus 25 says that God is jealous. So God, as the Bible defines him, does not exist because his very definition is inherently contradictory.
I had a friend, he grew up in a home, both his parents were atheists, they were professors. He was taught from birth, there is no God.
Oh, so when you say lack of evidence, what you really mean is lack of exposure to the evidence, which is apparently plentiful. Okay, well, here's the thing. I am perfectly happy letting people examine the evidence for themselves without pushing a particular conclusion onto them. I actually used to have a podcast where my oldest child and I read the Bible together, and I got their raw reactions to the various stories, and usually they would pick up on the problems long before I had any chance of pointing them out. So, yeah, I am fine with letting people see the evidence, but I prefer that it be all the evidence, not the selectively curated bits of evidence that come from apologists. Also, I rather like the little dig at academia thrown in there. His parents were both professors, so obviously they taught him that there was no God right from birth. That's not usually how it goes out here in the real world. Most people who don't believe in God actually don't focus on it in their daily lives all that much. Odds are, a child raised in such a home didn't hear much in the way of discussion about the topic, rather than being actively told that there is no God. So I'm not saying this guy's story is for sure not true, but it certainly sounds made up, or at the very least embellished.
But, so he was ignorant of all the evidence that there was a God.
Such as?
He spent 2.5 years studying the Bible with me, and at the end of that time, he got on his knees and gave his life to the true and living God, and he's followed God the rest of his life. He was just lacking evidence. He was ignorant.
I'd be willing to bet that if this is a true story, there's more to it. It wasn't a matter of just reading some bits of the Bible and converting. He was probably in a vulnerable position. Maybe he just lost a loved one or went through a divorce or got laid off. That's a pretty common theme in conversion stories. The person was down on their luck in some way when somebody came by and asked them if they've tried Jesus. And then they did, and Jesus made it all better. It is such a common theme that it's essentially the opening to Bible Man.
Miserable, alone, his spirit beaten, Miles Peterson gave up. Then in his darkest hour, the words of a single book began to change his life.
Bible.
And at last, Miles Peterson felt the burning desire to know God.
Fun fact, that ridiculous opening was actually the inspiration for how I filmed my Curse You, Mary Newman bit in my 10 more things that make no sense about Christianity video.
Curse you, Mary Newman!
But also, if you're reading the Bible while being guided through it by someone who is actively trying to convince you that it is true, odds are you're not gonna see the problematic passages, like all the genocide scattered throughout the Old Testament, or the fact that the biblical law treats rape as a property crime committed against whatever man owns the woman who was raped, or any of the many contradictions that can be found all throughout the Bible, etc., and so on. But if you instead just read the Bible through straight from start to finish, you don't miss out on any of that. And Christians should be all in favor of this method, as the whole Bible is the Word of God, right? So why would we avoid reading certain parts of the Word of God? Why are they seemingly embarrassed by some of the words of the guy that they worship and claim does everything completely perfectly? Just some food for thought.
Other people become atheists because they're disappointed. Something bad happened to them. They experienced a great trauma. They really wanted something to turn out a certain way, and it didn't turn out that way. So they got mad at God.
Christian movie atheism. Not actually atheist, just mad at God, so acting like an atheist. Sure, some people are atheists because of a bad experience of one kind or another, but the thinking there is more along the lines of a benevolent and all-powerful God would have stopped that from happening, so the fact that he did not means that a benevolent and all-powerful God does not exist, rather than it just being anger at a God that you actually still believe in.
If God is sovereign, then God should have fixed this. God should have changed that. God should have done this. So they get disappointed with God, so they say, well, there just is no God. If he's not the way I want him, then there is no God.
Oh, it's not about him not being the way that I want him. It's about him not being the way that y'all claim he is.
The third is defiance. It says in Romans chapter 1, and we're going to read this in a minute, that they've suppressed the truth. They know that there's a God, but they've suppressed the truth of God. They're choosing to say there is no God.
Why would anyone do that? That doesn't actually make any sense. But more to the point with the Romans 1 thing is that if everyone innately knows that God exists, and that the God that exists is specifically the Christian God, then you'd expect that, at least occasionally throughout history, a culture would be discovered which had developed Christianity as their religion before Christians showed up to tell them about it. That's actually a crucial plot point in the book Hyperion by Dan Simmons. A priest, desperate to renew interest in the church, faked evidence that an alien planet had developed a form of Christianity before the arrival of humans. Such evidence would be compelling indeed, and yet it remains in the realm of fiction despite being well within God's abilities to accomplish.
It's not an intellectual matter for them, really, but it's a matter of the will. And I think that's a primary reason why people become atheists, to the people I've talked to.
Oh, I very much doubt that you came to that conclusion from talking to people. Seems to me that it's more because that's what the Bible says, and you are obligated to believe the Bible, so you have to find a way to make that the primary reason that someone became an atheist in every circumstance, because if it weren't, then the Bible would be wrong. The problem is that, for atheists, this just serves to further prove that the Bible is wrong. I know that I don't still believe in God, so the Bible saying that I do is irrefutable evidence that the Bible is wrong here. Now, sure, that's the kind of thing that people who aren't me have to take my word for. There is no test that can prove that I'm not just lying about not believing in God, but I'm not the only one who has had this experience, and honestly, apologists should probably stop bringing this up. It doesn't actually accomplish anything. Well, to be fair, I'm pretty certain that this video isn't even trying to pretend to be directed at atheists. It's about explaining to Christians why atheists exist. So pretending that all atheists are a bunch of liars is fine for that purpose, I suppose. But as an atheist, I have had this verse thrown at me a number of times, along with the accusation that I'm just in denial. Even if there were some truth to this, maybe I do believe in God deep down somewhere where I'm not even consciously aware of it. Not sure how that would count as a belief, but okay, we'll grant it for now. But if that were the case, then telling me that I really do believe when consciously I believe that I do not believe, then that still just serves to support the idea that the Bible is wrong. So even if it were right, that makes it look wrong to the people that you're trying to convince. So ultimately, this verse is counterproductive if you actually want to convert people.
You talk to them long enough, you realize this is what the issue is. You can say, if I gave you all the evidence and enough evidence to believe, would you give your life to God? And they say no.
There's a difference between pretending something doesn't exist when you really know that it does, and saying that even if I did know that it existed, I wouldn't devote my life to it. Like, Michael Sheen's dog, Bark Ruffalo, is actually not a real dog. It's a CG animation played by Andy Serkis.
Yeah. Never work with animals or Michael Sheen. For one thing, he's not a real dog anyway. He is actually being played by Andy Serkis. Look at that.
But if you were to convince me that it actually is a real dog, that would not cause me to then devote my life to it. It would be a moment of, okay, great. Now back to business as usual. I already have a dog that my life is devoted to. That's not denial of the thing that you just convinced me is real. That is indifference to that thing. But in the case of atheism and the Christian God, it often looks more like hatred or disdain. But that's because of how the Bible describes God. If you've actually read the Bible, God is not benevolent. He is petty and jealous, visiting the iniquity of the fathers onto their children and their children's children to the third and fourth generation. He celebrates the murdering of interracial couples. When King David raped a woman and had her husband murdered to cover it up, he punished David by slowly torturing the baby to death. It tells slaves to obey their masters, even the cruel ones, because it makes you a better person if you endure beatings as a result of doing good things. And I could keep going. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I wouldn't want to devote my life to a person who behaves in the way that the Bible says that God behaves. So while I do not believe this person even exists, I can tell you that if you convince me that he does, the best you could hope for me is that I might pretend to worship him out of abject terror, but I would never be able to actually love such a monster.
They still want to do life without God. It's a matter of arrogance.
Is it arrogant to say that I wouldn't love a genocidal maniac even if you convinced me he was real? I don't think so. I think that's just being honest.
It says in Psalm 10, verse 4, the wicked in his proud countenance, in his pride, does not seek God. God is in none of his thoughts. He has no room for God.
Oh, that's funny. God is in none of my thoughts. Meanwhile, one of the most common Christian comments on my channel comes from people asking that if God weren't real, why do I spend so much of my mental energy thinking about him? Well, according to the Bible, I don't. So take that.
His pride, I don't need God. And I've talked to a lot of people like that.
I don't doubt that. In my case, my life actually got significantly better once I discarded God. Now, I'm sure Christians will chalk that up to Satan, saying that he's enticing me to stay an atheist, but these same Christians will then turn around and quote Bible passages about how God has plans for Christians to prosper and succeed in life. Seems like allowing the evil demon guy to improve life for apostates kind of works against that.
Some people, it's just wickedness. It says in Psalm 14, verse 1, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And if I say there is no God, then they become corrupt. They've done abominable works. There's none that does good.
Well, congratulations on leaving the last part of that verse in. Most apologists cut that off after the first sentence, because this is another verse that proves the Bible wrong. Here it is, saying clearly that there is nobody who has said that there is no God who does any good works whatsoever. So the fact that my little community of mostly atheists has, since 2019, raised over $80,000 for Project Share Niagara, a charity here in the Niagara region that is primarily a food bank, but also has a number of other services to help the community, is proof that the Bible is wrong. Unless you think housing the homeless, feeding the hungry, and helping the unemployed find work somehow doesn't count as good works, which, I mean, I get it. God thought that genocide was a good work and once rejected one of the kings of Israel for not being genocidal enough for his liking. So maybe he just wants the people of Niagara to suffer the same way he wanted the Amalekites to suffer. But that just swings us back around to the idea that I couldn't love someone as bad as God. Also, usually Christians like the picture of Jesus being someone who liked helping the poor and downtrodden. Even the capitalist Christians who want to cut government programs aimed at helping the less fortunate usually justify it by saying that Jesus never advocated for the government to help the poor. He was relying on personal choices to do the trick. So it's weird that you guys disagree with Jesus on this one.
You see, if I say there's no God, there's no accountability, so I can do any wicked thing I want, and it's not wicked because I say it's okay.
The problem with that is that it doesn't actually work. If I knew for a fact that the God of the Bible existed, I'd have to be a complete idiot to think that pretending he doesn't exist somehow allows me to escape from the consequences that he has for doing the stuff that he doesn't want me to do. My kids, for instance, know that there are consequences for not doing their chores. They don't pretend that I don't exist in order to escape those consequences, because denying obvious reality doesn't work for that. They do try and push boundaries, seeing just how little they can do and still get away with it, but even then, if called out on it, they don't deny that they didn't do their chores properly. Though I recognize that at least that part could just be that my kids are little weirdos. Most of them do have a bunch of my DNA after all, so
The third one is idolatry. And this is the main one. If I say there's no God, then I get to be God.
No, nobody thinks like that. Again, I know apologists like to say stuff like that in order to scare Christians away from ever considering the possibility that Christianity might be wrong. Because, hey, you don't want to end up being the kind of idiot who pretends that God doesn't exist in order to treat themselves as a god as a pretense for all the sinning they want to do, right? But in reality, that's not how it goes. Hell, one of my mental health struggles is negative self-talk. How could I possibly think of myself as a god when I struggle to even consider the possibility that I might even be halfway good at anything? Also, having children is a humbling experience. It is really hard to think of yourself as a god when you can't even get a 6-year-old to put on their goddamn shoes to go outside. How dare you defy me, child? I am your god!
It says in Romans chapter 1, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven." The judgment of God is revealed from heaven against all unrighteousness and ungodliness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Verse 19. "Because what may be known of God is revealed in them. For God has shown it to them." There's plenty of evidence. The creation has the Creator's fingerprints all over it.
They're just the fingerprints of a messy toddler who didn't know what they were doing. Recurrent laryngeal nerve of the giraffe, anyone?
Your conscience has the Creator's fingerprints all over it.
So Cassandra Nova is God? I'm sure she's happy to hear it.
Your longing for eternity has the Creator's fingerprints all over it.
Okay, but I don't long for eternity. And I'm not alone here. One of the most popular shows of the latter half of the 2010s was The Good Place, a show that, if I may spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it by now, ends when they fix heaven by removing eternity from it. Basically, you can live in heaven as long as you like, but when you've had enough, you step through a little gate and painlessly blink out of existence. This solved the problem of heaven ending up as rather boring. At a certain point, if your existence is eternal, you've done everything. There's nothing left. The fact that this show was so popular and that this is one of the few shows in recent memory where there hasn't been a massive public outcry about how it ended means that people at least saw its ending as reasonable, which suggests to me that an understanding that eternity will inevitably lead to boredom is rather common, meaning that there are lots of people who do not long for eternity.
Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and they changed the glory of the incorruptible God, listen, into an image made like a corruptible man. Themselves. Therefore, verse 24, God gave them up to uncleanness.
Did you notice that he skipped the end of verse 23? If you keep reading to the end of that sentence, it says, "and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things." This isn't some metaphor for thinking of yourself as God instead of worshiping the real God. This is about literal idolatry, making little statues of things that you call gods and worshiping those things. It's a fairly common practice in the ancient Roman Empire. This is one of those places where people who will advocate for a plain reading of scripture suddenly flip the script and explain that even though a plain reading of scripture is talking about literal idol worship, it's actually about metaphorical idols, things that are important in your life that you put above God, like your job, your hobbies, your friends, etc.
Verse 25, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator. That's idolatry.
And since I don't have little statues of people or creatures that I worship as gods, then I am not guilty of idolatry. Hooray for a plain reading of scripture. Oh, wait a minute. I don't have little statues, but do stickers count? Because Gay Unicorn Gary stickers are available now at merch.vicerhino.com.
And it leads to perversion.
Okay, well, I am a bit of a pervert. You got me there.
It says, therefore God gave them up to uncleanness in the lust of their hearts to dishonor their bodies among themselves. Why is this incredible explosion of homosexuality and sexual perversion?
You really going with the word explosion in reference to guys doing things with their dicks? Could you at least try to not make the cum jokes super easy? Okay, I guess in fairness, he didn't specify homosexual men, just homosexuality in general, but hey, here's a nifty little thought experiment you can do. There are two people. One of them doesn't care what you get up to in the bedroom as long as everyone is a consenting adult. The other is so obsessed with the bedroom activities of people that have nothing to do with them that even when talking about something completely unrelated, like religious belief, they still feel the need to steer the conversation toward those bedroom activities. Which of these two people is the pervert? And I guess just for completeness sake, I can tell you that the first person is gay, but that's actually rather irrelevant here. So I ask again, which one's the pervert?
Because when you have enough people going into idolatry, it leads you to perversion.
Strictly speaking, it said that God gives them up to the various perversions, so it's not that idolatry leads you to perversion all on its own, it's that God gets mad at the idolatry and so forces you into perversion so that he has an excuse to punish you. I'm sure the apologists will argue that when it says God gave them up to those things, that somehow doesn't actually mean that. It's their own choices that result in those things, but that's not what the words in the Bible actually say, so
God says if you want to serve, if you want to worship yourselves, worship yourself, but I'm stepping out of the picture. It says, for this reason God gave them up to vile passions. Their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature. The men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another. Men committing what is shameful and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error.
So this is where, if we leave the plain reading realm and move into the realm of nuance, which, to be fair, I'm not actually sure if Dave here would advocate for plain reading anyway. That's just kind of an assumption based on some of his stances, so maybe he would agree that nuance is a good thing. But if we actually use nuance here, then we have to ask ourselves what someone living in the culture of first century Rome would have thought about this passage, as well as looking at the overall context of Paul's letter in order to determine his goal in this writing. I'm going to give a brief explanation, but I will leave a link to Reverend Dr. Jonathan Talon's video on the subject, which goes into a lot more detail. First off, the context. Paul is using a rhetorical device here. He's writing to a Jewish audience, and he's using language that is typical of Jewish condemnations of pagan religions. But after he gets his audience nodding along with how bad the pagans are, he springs chapter 2 on them, which amounts to, and you're no better. Every time you pass judgment on the pagans in the way that I laid out in chapter 1, you're storing up God's wrath for you on Judgment Day. The question of homosexuality aside, Paul would be appalled at how Christians use Romans 1 today. Chapter 2 makes this quite clear, but I'm not sure I've ever heard an apologist quote anything from chapter 2, at least not directly. There are references to people having the law written on their heart, which we hear all the time, but it follows that up by suggesting that non-believers can go to heaven if they do good works. Romans 2:14 through 16. For when Gentiles do not have the law, by nature they do what the law requires. They are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them on the day when, according to my gospel, God judges the secrets of men by Christ Jesus. But that is a whole other can of worms. Just be aware that Romans 1 is supposed to get Jewish Christians nodding along in agreement about how immoral the pagans are before doing a rug pull and saying that y'all are just as bad as them. So now we need to look at the culture of the time to understand what a Jewish Christian living in Rome would have thought about the passage that modern Christians seem to think was about homosexuality. Remembering that this is about pagans worshiping idols, what did that practice actually look like in first century Rome? Well, one of the many cults that existed worshipped the goddess Cybele, and that particular cult had a reputation for ecstatic orgies with all the normal orgy stuff, but also with priestesses penetrating male eunuchs with dildos and men castrating themselves in excitement before running through town with their now detached bits in their hands. In all likelihood, there probably was some sex stuff happening, but not anywhere close to the extreme degree that was described. But this cult was not some fringe group. Its worship was a part of the official calendar in Rome, and Julius Caesar's wife was actually the head of the cult for a time. We also have to look at homosexuality through the same lens as the ancient Romans did. They didn't see sexuality the same way as we do today. For sex, it was more about status than gender. The higher status individual is the one who penetrates the lower status individual. A freeborn man is allowed to have sex with his own wife, boys, slaves, prostitutes, and apparently also actors and bar staff. None of that would count as adultery. Adultery is when you sleep with someone else's wife, and that was not socially acceptable. But we also have to look at the ancient Jewish attitudes about sex. At the time, referred to as Second Temple Judaism, they had a similar view as the modern Catholic Church on sex. That is, All sex has to be procreative in nature. This is important because when we take the passage as a whole, rather than breaking it into little chunks like modern apologists like to do, it makes Paul's mention of women make sense. It actually doesn't seem to be about female homosexuality. When reading the whole thing, it fits pretty well as a polemic against the reputation of the Cybele worship ceremonies. Women exchange natural relations with those that are contrary to nature, pegging their eunuchs. The men gave up natural relation with women, engaging in the socially accepted male-on-male sex, where the higher status man penetrates the lower status man. But they have received their due penalty for their error. They've now been castrated in the ecstasy of the worship ceremony. Of course, this is by no means the only possible interpretation of this passage, but it is almost certainly a polemic against pagan idol worship leading to a polemic against Christian hypocrisy, rather than a condemnation of homosexuality. All this to say that y'all should stop focusing on sex so much. It makes you come across as a bunch of perverts, and if you just read a little bit further in your own damn book, Paul agrees with me. I'm skipping the rest of this passage. It's just Dave falling into Paul's rhetorical trap, where he reads the list of bad traits that pagans have, and then talks about how those people deserve the judgment of God and death. He does not read the very next verse, chapter 2, verse 1, which says, "Therefore you have no excuse, O man, every one of you who judges. For in passing judgment on another, you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, practice the very same things." So Dave is doing the very thing that Paul is warning against here.
We just had a whole month in our country celebrating homosexuality. That's described right there. That's perversion. It's because of idolatry. It's because people choose not to worship God.
And you passing judgment on it is the exact same thing, according to Paul. So if Pride Month is actually a bad thing, then you getting up on your high horse to complain about those who celebrate it is at least as bad.
Look, there is a God. There's plenty of evidence for God. And He designed the universe, so the only way it really works is if He is in the center. And the only way your life works is if He is your God and you do what He says.
Oh, ending on a threat. Classy. Do as he says, or else. That's it for this one. Today's comment of the day comes to us from PootyCat8359, who says, "How is it that discovering errors in a collection of writings composed over several millennia would cause you to conclude that there is no God, or that some of what's in those books isn't true? Have you also read the Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads, Vedas, Zendavesta, Tao Te Ching, Egyptian Book of the Dead, Coming Forth by Day, etc., and concluded they're all bullshit? What about modern accounts encountering a loving presence in the spirit world by people who have had OBEs and NDEs? Just because a tribal deity worshipped by a band of ancient desert dwellers isn't the god of the universe doesn't mean the latter doesn't exist." Well, PootyCat, you're correct. My demonstrating that the God of the Bible does not exist does not automatically mean that every other God from every other religion also does not exist. But I don't actually see any reason to assume that any of them do exist, so until such a time as I am presented with convincing evidence for one of them, I shall continue not believing in any of them. I recognize that this isn't an argument against their existence, but as much as I hate burden of proof discussions outside of formal debate settings, it is worth keeping in mind that in casual conversation, the burden of proof lies not necessarily on the person making the claim, but on the person who actually cares about convincing other people of their position. In the case of Christianity, I set out to convince people that it is wrong. To that end, I support the things that I say with evidence. For all these other religions, though, in most cases, they're religions that I have very little experience with, ones that have no impact on my day-to-day life, and so in my personal life, I've never seen a reason to do a deep dive on their claims about God. And in my videos, I'm not aiming to convince people that they are wrong, so I usually just don't even touch on them. So if you want to convince me that one of them is true, that's fine, we can have that conversation. But to just expect people to treat all God claims with equal seriousness and rigor is just unreasonable. Thanks for watching. I'll be back next Friday with more, but if you need to get your Rhino fix in before then, I live stream with Cirrus every Wednesday at 8:30 Eastern on my other channel, The Watering Hole. Thanks to Piper for being my editor, and special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the eunuchs that get pegged by the priestess that is my channel. If you'd like to freak Paul out, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com, which is also where you'll find links to my other projects. If you've got fan art that you'd like to be featured behind me, post it on Blue Sky and tag me. I'm at vicerhino.bsky.social. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my PO box address is in the description. See you next time. Hola y bienvenido a mi canal. Your voice automatically gets deeper when you speak Spanish. We are making history. Try and remember to check, but if you don't see me plugging Gary stickers, yeah, plugging Gary because he's got the butt plug horn.